I was talking about. So it's 2 Kings chapter 7. And 2 Kings chapter 7. Okay. In 2 Kings chapter 7, Israel, the nation of Israel, is at war with the nation of Syria. Now, there's a lot more background that I'm going to be giving you more of here in a little bit. But the nation of Syria has besieged, not invaded and actually conquered, but has besieged the city where these people are. It's where the king is. It is where, this is different. This is not Jerusalem. At this time, Israel was a split nation. Judah was the southern nation. That's where Jerusalem was. The northern kingdom was Israel. So they're in the northern king, and the city that they're in is besieged. In other words, nobody can get in or out, and their food supply is running very low. As a matter of fact, they're almost out of food. To give you an example of just how short the food supply was, if you were to go back a chapter, they actually, in Samaria, which is near where they were actually selling donkey heads for 80 pieces of silver. A donkey's head, not as meat, not they've already done away with that. They've already eaten that. Donkey heads were selling for 80, 30 pieces of silver? This is 80 pieces of silver. This is a fortune that it costs just to buy a donkey's head. This one you might, if that one doesn't get you, this one might. 1/4 of a piece of dove's dung. 1/4 of a piece of dove's dung sold for 5 pieces of silver. That's how hungry they were. Ridiculously starving the people were. You're pretty much dying of starvation at that point, okay? So that's where the people are. Elisha is the prophet. Prior to this, Elisha has done several things, and he's done many miraculous things, to the point that he has the king's attention. Whatever Elisha says do, the king commands the army to do. That's what this is happening here, okay? In 2 Kings chapter 7, that's where we're at. Elisha's in the city with the people. They're starving. The king doesn't know what to do. And in verse 1 of chapter 7, it says, "Then Elisha said, 'Hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, 2 sheas of barley, the silver.'" That costs a fortune just to buy some rotten food. And he just said, "This time tomorrow, at the gate of Samaria, they're going to be selling a bag of flour for a nickel. This time tomorrow, they're going to be selling 2 bags of barley for a nickel. For nothing." How can that? Well, no, wait a minute. I want you to notice something. The people in the city were looking for the big miraculous and God to come down and bring lots of food. Elisha did not bring them a word that told them, God's going to pour out all this food and all this food is coming. That's not what he said. He said something very strange, and he simply said, tomorrow they're going to sell flour for a nickel, and they're going to sell 2 bags of barley for a nickel. That's kind of a weird prophecy, isn't it? Telling you what the price of food is going to be tomorrow. What was happening here, and what God has had in my heart for more than 2 weeks now, and I personally wanted to preach this last week. God had another message for last week. This is what God has for his people here today, and that is this. Sometimes you're in a situation where you simply need God, through your faith, to give you a different perspective. You're many times in a situation where you're wishing God would change the whole thing. Change every single circumstance of this environment, change it all, flip it around, and make it all 100% different from what it is now. That's what we want God to do, but sometimes God is just saying, I just need you to change your perspective on this. That's all I need you to do right now. No, I'm not doing this huge, big, major thing right now for you here where you can see it. So all I need you to do is change your perspective, because the price of food for them was their perception and was their perspective. So that's what God was saying. He's saying, I'm changing your price of food. He's saying, I'm changing your perspective. In other words, God was saying, I need you guys to look at this situation differently. Now, how many people in this room can honestly say, you have thrown fits in your life spiritually, you've thrown a fit on God, you've yelled at Him, you've done all this, wondered why He would do this and all this kind of stuff, and you wish that God would just change everything, but you know good and well, looking back on it, you know good and well the problem was not that God wasn't moving. The problem was you refused to see through faith the perspective God was trying to give you to look at. Sometimes you was looking at it the wrong way. Okay? Have you ever, I'll put myself out there. Have you ever made the mistake of, it's the best way to describe this. I've done this with my kids. I've done this with my kids before. Like Jet might leave a cereal bowl out or something like that. And sometimes I might be passing by, and there is a cereal bowl on the table. Jet, come here. You didn't put the cereal bowl away, and there I tell you, you got to clean up after yourself. You got to do that. I keep telling you, and you don't do it. And every once in a while, I'll do that, and he'll look over there, and he'll look and he'll say, "Dad, that's your bowl." Oh, you know what the problem was? I looked at it wrong. I saw it in another way. If I had looked at it from another perspective, I would have seen what was really there, and I wouldn't have thrown that fit, right? See, and that's kind of a little humorous, whatever, a little light. But you all know that there's many times in your life you looked at something wrong. You didn't look at it the way God was trying to get you to see it. And so therefore you could not have the faith you needed to have. You could not see what it was that God was trying to get you to see. So He's saying, look, guys, you got to change your perspective. I understand you all over here starving. I understand you guys are fighting over and spending life savings just to eat some donkey's head that is, and bird poop over here. I understand you all got some problems. I understand things are rough and all of that, but you all need to change your perspective. Now, how can you look at a city that's starving like that and tell them to change their perspective? Well, in most cases, that would be asking quite a bit from them, except for the simple fact that they were in the presence of the man of God, Elisha, the prophet. They had God on their side. You understand? The nation that has God on its side, right here, this is Israel. Israel had God on its side. Therefore, they should have a different perspective than other people. They should have a different outlook on things going on around them. And that's something I believe God is really trying to teach the church in this generation that we live in. You have God on your side. God is for you. If God be for us, then who can be against us? Greater is He who is in me than he who is in this world. And if the church will own up to that and begin to realize, man, God's on my side. Why in the world do I need to have this same pitiful perspective that other people who are non-believers might have of the same situation? I will tell you this right now. Sometimes we just need to realize we need to stop talking like the world when it comes to addressing situations around. We need to stop that because God's on our side. Have a different perspective about this thing. Stop. There's something about just tweaking the perspective. Look at it different. Instead of, God, you got to change this. No, you just need to see it differently for a moment to increase your faith. So rather than being a Christian who is, oh, the devil is trying to kill me, change it. The devil is trying to kill me. Isn't he a fool? You know what I mean? Change your perspective. Look at it different because God's on your side. So Elijah says, guys, God's on our side. Look, I know that today a donkey's head costs 80 shekels, but tomorrow Guys, tomorrow, God's on our side today. So tomorrow, flour's going to be sold for a nickel. Don't worry about it. Change your perspective. Look at things different. Yes, I understand you're starving today, but change your perspective. Yeah, you'd be in a world of hurt starving today if God wasn't on your side, but He is. So cheer up. Tomorrow around this time, everything's going to be different. You just need to change your perspective on it now. Elisha is saying all of this, and that's all great, and it's all wonderful, and every one of us as believers who have been through some stuff in our lives and who have been through some really taxing and trying times in our lives, in our hearts, and our minds, and situations that we've gone through, everybody out there saying, preacher, that sounds great, and that preaches great, and it's very poetic, but how is me simply changing my perspective and looking at it different and talking about it different, how is that going to do anything? God needs your faith to maintain where it's at. You need to take care of your faith in the situation. You need to take care of your faith in this time and let God take care of the circumstances. You understand what I'm saying? Because little did these people know that while Elisha was saying that, while Elisha was standing there saying, you know, guys, you got to change your perspective. You got to look at this different. Which, by the way, let's go to verse 2. I need to read this to you. So an officer on whose hand the king leaned, is basically the king's assistant, answered the man of God and said, look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be? And he said, in fact, you shall see it with your eyes, but shall not eat of it. You're going to see it, buddy, but you won't get any. Now, Elisha's right, and I'm going to show you here in a little bit what happens. But what's being shown here is once God has established His word, and once God has established what is true, it doesn't matter what the circumstances say, God has established truth. The minute that you begin to doubt what God can do in this circumstance, you have immediately removed yourself from being able to partake. How many times have you seen God move and yet it didn't seem to quite make it all the way to you? You saw God move in a situation, but the blessings didn't quite make it to you, and you didn't partake. What is being illustrated here is this man said, I don't know about this. I mean, if God could open up windows in heaven, could He do this? Elisha just said what He was going to do. God established the truth. And this man began to question it and even doubt it. So now he does not get to partake. And you're going to see why here later. Meanwhile, so this is all what's going on in the city. Meanwhile, way yonder ways, these people don't even know what's going on in another location. But in verse 3 it tells us, now there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate, and they said to one another, why are we sitting here until we die? If we say we will enter the city, the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. Now therefore come, let us surrender to the army of the Syrians. If they keep us alive, we shall live. If they kill us, we shall only die. This story is a great story in and of itself. It's these 4 lepers, and God is about to do a miracle, and He's going to use them. And it's going to feed the city. It's going to feed all of Israel through this blessing. But what strikes me is these are 4 random lepers roaming out in the desert. Now, you do know this is in 2 Kings. This is the prophet Elisha. Don't get confused. Elijah and Elisha and all this stuff. Elisha is the prophet, and his story begins in 2 Kings. And his miracles are greatly documented. There's many of them. But one of his most famous miracles ever that he did was when he healed a leper, a Syrian general by the name of Naaman. Okay? Many people in this room, you know the story of Naaman the leper. Okay? That was Elisha that did that. Elisha healed Naaman the leper. At that time, this is 2 chapters earlier, Naaman had Elisha had an understudy, not an understudy. He had we'd call it a protege. He's learning from Elisha by the name of Gehazi. Gehazi is observing all of this and sees Elisha refuse to take any money from Naaman. And Gehazi's like, well, daggone, man. So Gehazi runs back to Naaman and is like, look, I'll take the money. You tried to pay him. He didn't want it. I'll take it. So he does. He gives him money. You can't get one over on a man of God. Elisha knew what had happened. Does anybody remember what happened to Gehazi because of this? He and his 3 sons were struck with leprosy that day. Pow. Gehazi and his 3 sons were struck with leprosy as punishment, as a repercussion, because Gehazi went behind Elisha's back and tried to profit off of this with money. That was 2 chapters earlier. I do not find it coincidence at all that 2 chapters later, there are 4 random, unnamed, leprous men walking in the wilderness. Okay? I'm not saying the Bible doesn't make it clear, so we can't say for certain, but I really have a strong feeling these 4 lepers are Gehazi and his sons. Okay, you with me? See, sometimes you have to consider the fact that even mistakes you've made in your past, God never stopped keeping track of what he could use from that to bless you later. God never stops picking up broken pieces around you. You made a mistake, you made a mess. God has never stopped picking up broken pieces, knowing there's going to come a time I can bless them with this later. That's what you need to start realizing. That's the God that's on your side. Have a different perspective. See, Elisha knew this. And Elisha knew, look, even though Gehazi made a mistake back then, even though all this, look, God is going to keep things moving, and he is going to keep blessing his people, and he is going to keep moving in a great and mighty way for his people. So we need to have a different perspective. So these 4 random lepers are out walking around. And they're walking in the wilderness, and they decide that we're going to go surrender ourselves to the Syrians so that we don't starve to death. They rose at twilight, verse 6, to the camp of the Syrians, and when they had come to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots and the noise of horses, the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel is hired against us, the kings of the Hittites, kings of the Egyptians, to attack us. Therefore they arose and fled at twilight and left the camp intact, their tents, their horses, their donkeys, and fled for their lives. And when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they went in one tent, ate and drank, and carried from it silver and gold and clothing, and went and hid them. And when they came back and entered another tent, carried some from there also, and went and hid it. Then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This day is a day of good news, and we remain silent. If we wait until morning light, some punishment will come upon us. Now therefore come, let us go and tell the king's household. Bear with me. If this is Gehazi, which I think it is, you put yourself in his shoes for a moment. He made a mistake. He did. He went and tried to take money from Naaman when he knew he shouldn't. Mistake. But man, then Elisha cast him with leprosy, him and his sons, for a lifetime. Can you imagine the bitterness? I can't believe Elisha did that to me and my boys. And knows that Elisha and all the rest of the city is over there starving. And guess what they come and find? Enough food to feed a country. You know what my first thoughts would be if I'm Gehazi? You take that, Elisha. Show you to put leprosy on me and my boys. You know, isn't it something that there is actually, even in a Christian, and nobody in here needs to verify, nod, raise a hand, nothing. You just do it to yourself. You know. Everybody in this room knows that there are times, even as a Christian, bitterness is in there, and you will sometimes even take pleasure in the calamity of your enemies. Somebody's going through something, and there'll be a little smirky spirit inside of you going, shouldn't have done me wrong. You know what I mean? You all know what I mean? Right? Even us good old Christian folk. Bitterness is an ugly enemy. And sometimes, we have missed out on what God's trying to do collectively because we spent too much time dwelling in our own little secret bitter spot. Forget you, you know. These men found all this food that could feed the whole city, and their initial plan was to hide it and keep it all for themselves. But God, through His Holy Spirit, however He worked with this, before morning came, the one said, guys, we ain't doing right. This ain't right. Now remember, if this is Gehazi, which by the way, you all with me? I'm not trying to go too deep and too fast and all this stuff, and it's a lot, and I know, and I'll close here in a little bit, but just bear in mind, if this is Gehazi, he has a reason to be bitter at Elisha, but at some point, he says, guys, this ain't right. I know Elisha did us wrong, which he didn't really, you know, he's just seeing from his own perspective. I know Elisha put this leprosy on us. But guys, this ain't right. God did not bless us with this to keep it for ourselves. Sometimes God will challenge you to change your perspective, see things differently, and have faith to even hope for blessings upon those that you have to get past some bitterness. Because sometimes you're saying, God's not just trying to bless the individual. Sometimes God's trying to bless the group. Sometimes He's trying to bless the community, the church, the family, the house. Well, if you're praying against somebody on the other side of the church, sometimes you're preventing your own blessing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen churches where people they've prayed against the pastor. Not here. I think you all do a pretty good job of helping me out here. But I will tell you, I've been in some churches, and I've grown up in some churches, and I never did understand. I could never understand it. There'd be a board with 5 or 6 demons or deacons on the board right there, and they're praying against the pastor. I've seen it happen in my own town. I've seen friends of mine, a friend of mine at church way up north in Farmersville. He just quit one day. You know what he did? He turned to the board and he said, I ain't going to be here next Sunday. And they said, what do you mean? He said, you guys hate me that much? You find somebody else. I ain't going to be here next Sunday. Left them all, and they're scratching their heads. They didn't get anybody that Sunday. You know what they did? They had to put their tail between their legs, and they called him on Monday, and they said, brother, we need you to come back. He said, then you need to be gone because I'm done. You know, he changed the name. He said, I'll come back. He explained this to me. What he said was, one day this has happened to me before. One day he just woke up and saw everything different. He cried for 6 months wondering how my own board hates me. They're praying against me. And then one day he just said, I don't need them. If God has blessed me here, He can bless me somewhere. I don't need, God's on my side. And so he woke up, he said, guys, I'm going to be here Sunday. I'll see you later. And they're like, you know, we need you. He said, I know you do. Oh, I know you need me. The church needs me. So if you want me back, you all put your little resignations in. I'll choose another board. We're going to do this all different. He changed the name of the church. He changed the entire board. He restructured the entire thing. And that church is now one of the greatest churches in the city. Because you change your perspective. And you begin to realize this isn't about me trying to get some individual blessing. Sometimes God's trying to bless us all. So the minute we let bitterness just leave behind and we actually start praying for our enemies. And we actually start, if God needs to bless them too in order to bless me, then by God, bless them. Bless them. So here's this fella.
He said, guys, this ain't right. We got to share this. So they go back to the king, and they say, King, we got all this. The king comes back. They got all of this food. They bring all the food to the city. And I'll be daggone, they're at the gate selling flour for a nickel. It's exactly what God said. But y'all remember the guy earlier, the day before, who said, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if God can sell flour for a nickel tomorrow. Even if God could open up the windows of heaven, could he still do it? Remember what Elisha said to that guy? You're going to see it, but you're not going to partake of it. That was the king's assistant. The king said to the assistant, I need you to do crowd control at the gate. I need you to go to the gate and orderly fashion organize people to come in and get their food. Do what he did. He came to the gate. He said, the food's in here. Everybody took off running, ran him over, killed him. Trampled him. I guess Elisha was right again, wasn't he? You'll see it, but you won't partake. Now that's a little rough. I ain't been run over by a crowd and killed lately. That's pretty rough. That's Old Testament rough. Okay? We serve a pretty gracious God now. There's been some times I deserved to be run over by a couple bulldozers because I didn't have the faith that it took to believe for what God had said. But God, through his grace, got me through them times. Now it's time for me to change my perspective. I'm going to close with this. Turn with me to the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 4. New Testament, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. It's very simple. God brings it back to exactly what it's been the whole time. Change your perspective. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Verse 7, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. Verse 8, we are hard-pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Look, just look at this verse. Go back to verse 8, and we're going to go through the rest of it. Just go back to verse 8. Look here. We are hard-pressed. Well, good Lord, anybody in this room ever felt spiritually hard-pressed? There's your verse. You're in there. We are hard-pressed on every side. But change your perspective. It's one thing to go around your whole life going, I'm hard-pressed on every side. No, it's not over. Change your perspective. I'm hard-pressed. You haven't been defeated yet. Okay. Oh, preacher, I've been through hell. Congratulations, you made it. Through is the key word. You made it. I heard another preacher say, what am I doing if I'm going through hell? Well, for God's sakes, don't stop. Keep moving, you know. Change your perspective. Hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Verse 9, persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. You understand this verse is illustrating the very point that God has been making since the time of Elisha. Change your perspective. Change your perspective. Why? Because God's on your side. You should be seeing things. You should be having a different perspective. God's on your side. I'll close with this right here. How is it that Elisha was so bold? Do you think Elisha ever wondered where they'd get their food from? I bet he did. He didn't know. Not for sure, maybe not at that moment. But he had faith. What happens in a man's life where he can boldly stand before people who are dying of starvation and tell them that flour will cost a nickel tomorrow? Well, earlier, Elisha had been in a place with another man, and they were surrounded by the enemy. And that man said, Elisha, what are we going to do? I see the enemy. You remember this? Elisha prayed a prayer to God and said, let him see what you see, God. And the man opened his eyes and he looked and he saw, you remember what he saw? Chariots of fire surrounding the enemy. Because see, Elisha had said, there's more for us than there are against us. How did Elisha know that there would be chariots, heavenly chariots of fire? How did he know that heaven had chariots of fire? Well, you have to go back even further to a little valley with another man named Elijah, the prophet, who said, if you see me go up into heaven, then you will get this double portion blessing that you want. And Elisha was there, and guess what he saw for the first time that day? A chariot of fire. Elisha never forgot that. And I do believe that day he walked away going, well, I'll be daggone. Heaven has chariots of fire. Who'd have thought? So now Elisha goes the rest of his life like, man, heaven's got chariots of fire. So now when the enemy surrounds him and everybody else is going, what are we going to do? Guess why Elisha's going, don't worry about it, man. If you've only seen what I've seen. Oh, they got chariots. That ain't nothing. Heaven's got chariots of fire, man. See, sometimes you just got to lean on faith that God has brought you through things before. God brought me through here. Elisha remembered, well, if heaven had one chariot of fire that day, I'll bet they've got more. And I'll bet you they're here today. So God opened his eyes and let him see, right? God has brought you through even the small things. It's time to begin to realize that it's the same God who will get you through where you're at now. You just need to change your perspective. Everybody stand to your feet if you will.